All right, history teachers, we're live again today, day 2 of the summit. If you can hear us, if you can see us, let's see, pop a number in the chat of how you're feeling about the end of the summer. Let's say like 0 if you're like, please don't end, a 1 if you're ready to go back to school.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we got maybe
All
one
right,
ready to go back to school,
couple
or
a
else they might
couple
not.
ones.
After a while, though, you do get to where you're really just kind of ready to go back. I'm not quite there yet, I don't think. But yes, looks like we've got some folks here with us. And oh my goodness, Krista, already back in school. I have to go back later this week, students next week, I believe. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, I guess thank you, Amanda, for having me on here today at the Fiveable Summit. Great doing some work with this new company. And this is going to be about AP History multiple choice strategy. Okay, so yesterday y'all had some things on SAQs and the DBQ. And so we're moving on to multiple choice. All right. And so let me introduce myself for anybody who doesn't know me. I'm Tom Ritchie. You can find me at my website, tomritchie.net, or at youtube.com, Tom Ritchie. I've been teaching for 10 years at Seneca High School, where I teach AP Euro and AP US history. And I also create online videos, instructional materials, and stuff like that. Gosh, so many of y'all are already back at school. That's unreal. All right, so that's who I am. I've still got, looks like you can probably see my hair's still wet, but then again, that's the nice thing about the online format. I'm sure a lot of other people are watching in pajamas and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and get into the strategy. All right. Thank you so much, Crystal. And so the thing is, first of all, let's go ahead and start off with a thesis statement. Okay. So, as far as the angle that I'm coming from for approaching the multiple choice, is that it's a content test, not a reading comprehension test, which I think that's really the number one understanding that kids need to realize, because when they see this format, they're thinking, okay, well, I need to approach this like I would approach like the ACT or the SAT or something like that. Now, the materials are going to be sent out with all of the links and everything like that. You'll see that there's a link to a document that I created a few years ago that I want to update a little bit, but that's really the basis for the presentation. But a lot of the key stuff is really going to be on the slides that I'm going to show you. So, not approaching it like a reading comprehension test, remembering it's a content test. It's a test of what they've got in their head, not nearly as much a test of, okay, how good of a reader are they? And if a student approaches this as a reading test, then this can be really really bad, as far as, kid's going to run out of time. They've only got, a minute per question, basically. So they've got to make some, very efficient decisions. And what I've heard some people say about this test, some of these things I didn't make up, but I kind of get from other people. But the best thing I really heard here was an easier test with harder instructions. And to me, now there are people who may disagree with me on this. There are healthy discussions about this, but I still like to use old style questions because I think that they're actually more difficult. I've had students that when I switch to the stimulus based questions, I'll show them their first stimulus based questions, and they're like, these are so easy compared to the ones we've been doing, because, this test has gotten easier. But here's the thing: the College Board has stakeholders on both sides. On one side, the test has to be, easy enough for a kid to pass. The high schools, the teachers, the students, they want something that's passable. Now, the colleges and universities, they need something that's rigorous. Okay. So what the College Board's done with the stimulus-based questions is made these questions that really don't require a great deal of content knowledge to figure out. But when the colleges and universities see this, they're like, oh my goodness, this looks so high, so high level. And, this is, oh wow, because they don't understand it. And once you understand it, then it's like, well, actually, this is really just a lot of smoke and mirrors. And you really have to get students thinking, what is this question really asking us? And so, as far as that goes, now, Robert, I'm gonna send you to direct you to Albert.io. If you put in your subject and you put in score calculator, the first link that comes up should be to my friends at Albert.io, and they've got a score calculator, which is amazing. And you can see, and that's another thing to keep in mind, that to pass this exam, a kid's really got to score half the points across the board. It's like half the multiple choice, half the points on the SAQs, and then a 3 on the DBQ, a 3 on the LEQ. If a kid goes through and does that and earns half the points, then that's done. And that's another thing as we get into, kind of some strategies that aren't really central to this presentation, but letting kids know, like, if there's something that is an item looks especially difficult, the kids shouldn't sit there trying to piece this together, because, it's just, hey, every question's worth the same, and you can miss half of them if you need to and still pass the test. So I think that that's a very important thing to share with kids, because it's like, look, you don't want to sit there on that harder item and miss out on easier items later on. By the way, Jenny, if you're watching from Chicago Stag High School, I've got your Stag mug. Thank you so much for sending that to me. And I want to go into a bit of a disclaimer, okay? And yes, all of these questions call on content to answer, and that's my central thesis, the central point that I'm bringing to the table here. Now, I want to have a disclaimer, because I'm not advising students not to read the stimulus, but I think that this is helpful in adopting a particular mindset for the strategy for answering these questions. A lot of the times, the stimulus is typically going to need to be read, but not necessarily as closely as you would read it on an SAT, ACT test. It's really about going in there, okay, what is the time period, all of that kind of stuff. And a lot of the questions can be answered, or a lot of items can be eliminated down to 2. What you'll notice when I've done webinars and I've had features allowing people to guess the right answer, almost all the time there are 2 answers that less than 20% of people pick between the 2 of them. It's like 80% of people look at this and they get down to 2 answers. Now, sometimes you just have to pick one, because they can be kind of confusing, but it's very easy to eliminate answers, and a lot of times without even looking at the stimulus. The stimulus, one teacher called the stimulus oftentimes a window dressing. This is something that, again, the College Board wants colleges and universities to look at this test and be like, wow, this is so challenging, and students have to do these complex tasks. And it's really about appearances more than anything. And it's our job as teachers to deconstruct this for students, okay? And so as far as this goes, I've got something here that, first of all, when we approach these questions, we have to think about, how does this question relate to the stimulus? And I've seen that probably only about a quarter to a third of the questions on any individual test really, strictly speaking, require the stimulus. Now, and I'm talking about a student that's going to make a 4 or 5 on the test. It's like that student could answer the vast majority of the questions without looking at the stimulus material. As teachers, you've probably had situations like me where you make copies of the test, and then the student asks, hey, I can't really see this visual thing, and then I tell them, like, you don't actually need that visual to answer the question, so don't even worry about it. A lot of times these visuals are put up there and they're not really as necessary as one might think. And I tell the student, like, see if you can answer the question without looking at it, because a lot of times students think, I've got to take this in order to get the right answer. So, some of the questions a student will not be able to answer without looking at the stimulus, but that is not the majority of the questions. Now, then you've got this kind of gray area here. Sometimes the stimulus is helpful, okay, which of course, when we think about it, the stimulus is supposed to stimulate. That's where this comes from, okay? So, for a student that's on the way to making a 3 on the exam, this stimulus may help bring out some things that were kind of buried deep in their head, and they're like, oh, you know what, that's kind of stimulating my mind and making me think about it. Whereas your student that is going to get a 4 or 5, they probably don't need the stimulus in order to remember, their understanding of that topic, or if it's just a strong topic for them. Now, the big thing here, and I've seen that now, it varies from exam to exam. The balance of these, it varies from exam to exam, but on a lot of these questions, the stimulus is unhelpful. Like, it's just, there is nothing in the stimulus whatsoever that is going to help a student answer this question. And I think that it's important for students to realize that a lot of these questions, even though they're in a set, group topically, they don't need the stimulus to answer a lot of these questions, and they need to rely on what's in here rather than what's there, distracting them. And so that's the thing. And yes, sometimes, and I think that that's really key there for your students who are going for a 3, Megan, is that they are being reminded of some things. And to that extent, this stimulus could help you, be reminded of things, but it's not going to answer the question for them in most cases. So for every question, necessary, helpful, or unhelpful. Now, I will say that I've had a conversation with somebody on one of the test development committees who told me that their official policy is that one question in the set has to make a direct reference to the stimulus. So you could have a question set of 4 where it was really only necessary to answer the for the stimulus for one question. So that can be, yes. And Christine, that is exactly what I think the most valuable part, and we're going to be drilling through a few of these, is the attribution. It's like, okay, so this is 1480, the guy's Portuguese, age of exploration. And once somebody's got that, and then they realize, okay, what is it that I need to remember about the age of exploration? What is it that is going to be tested? Maria, I would recommend albert.io. That is my go-to site. They've got things individual students can buy a membership, but they've also got Albert for schools. And if you want to try it, I would email Albert on their website and say that you're a teacher and you would like to try out Albert with your students for a limited time. But I think they've got amazing analytics. Their questions are in a lot. I mean, I've been more impressed with their questions than I have been with other questions. So I think that albert.io is typically my thing here. Does the queen steal apples? Okay, Robert, you'll have to explain that one to me at some point. All right, so necessary, helpful, and unhelpful. That's the relationship between the question and the stimulus. And I think that students understanding this relationship is very, very important. Now, the next thing, this is where I think the other side of this is, because this test is extremely formulaic in how things are answered and how the answer choices are laid out. Like, what we've got here is that students are used to, I mean, and I do the same thing when I teach, a regular like non-AP history course, that on a multiple choice test, there is a correct answer and there are 3 wrong answers. And students are used to this on most tests, that it's, they have this mindset that, one answer is going to be correct and the other 3 are going to be wrong. And, they bring this mindset in, and that can really trip people up. Now, what I've done here, and I actually did this using Albert.io questions, and my issue was, I was thinking, okay, is this Albert site for real? Are these questions like the College Board questions? Because the problem that I've run into sometimes is, you've seen probably some homemade question sets where, or question sets that have come with a book or something, and it ends up that you're like, this is more of a reading comprehension kind of thing. This really isn't following the format of the College Board questions. And so as far as this goes, I've got 3 types of distractors. And what a kid needs to realize is that this is something that, most of the incorrect answers aren't wrong. Okay, they're not wrong. And so first of all, out of period. Okay, so first of all, the student is looking for, what are some answers here that are not applicable to the time period of the question? When we've looked at the attribution, we see that this is 15th century, and you know what? This was in the 17th century, so this cannot be correct because this isn't even this isn't even in the right time period. So if the student is looking for that, for example, if you teach APUSH, if it is about colonial America and there is an answer about cotton agriculture, this would be a great example of an out of period distractor, because we're looking at cotton agriculture, and we know, oh wait, cotton agriculture, that's in the antebellum period with the cotton gin. Cotton is not a profitable cash crop during the colonial period, and that's really one of the major things there. Now, another thing that I want to note is sometimes out of place. That can also be something that a student can look for. What is it that, okay, this may be at the same time, but this was something that was applicable to New England rather than the South. So sometimes I'll tell students out of period or out of place, but out of period is really the one that they need to be looking for, that it is not applicable to this time period and typically in another century. Now, the next thing is irrelevant. The distractor makes a correct statement that is not relevant to the topic. Now, there is an exam, a Euro exam, that I like to use, when I'm talking to live audiences, that's been released to teachers. And it's got one on the age of exploration that's got some really great examples of irrelevancy. So first of all, like if it's about like trade in the Renaissance era in the age of exploration, and one of the distractors was the development of new banking techniques. And the thing is that, yes, new banking techniques were being developed, but it's not relevant to trade. Okay. So it'll be stuff like that where this is a correct statement. It's in the time period, but it's not relevant. And so, if a kid is looking first for out of period and then second for irrelevant answers, then we look for, okay, which one of these is wrong? And if a student realizes that there are actually 3 categories of incorrect answers, it can make the process more efficient if they're going through these instead of like every answer has to be wrong. Now, the wrong answers are another thing that they're really, a lot of times, they're really not that nuanced and tricky. Most of the time, it's going to be the opposite. Okay. It's going to be the opposite of what actually, happened. And so it'll be like, one word, instead of Mediterranean, trade moving from the Mediterranean, it'll say that trade moved to the Mediterranean during the age of exploration. And so even for the wrong answers, there is a template here that is typically followed. And I think that that's really the thing that sort of unlocks this for students, is realizing that there really is a formula, there is a way to take this test. Now, I'm going to be showing you some examples that really highlight, what I'm saying here about things that, don't really require the stimulus. It's important to note for students, like, there are a lot of items that will require you to look at the stimulus in some way, but there are some that really, like, you don't even have to look at it outside of the attribution. And so first of all, let me do a couple of APUSH examples. So looking at the First Great Awakening. Now, Amanda will send these slides out later on. You will get, a direct link to my Need to Know handout. And let me go ahead. I'm going to start sharing my screen here, because I'm going to get into more of the nitty gritty here. And I want to make, a lot of people ask, are you going to make more of these or something like that? And, at some point I'll make, do I have more? At some point I'll probably make more, but, it's really kind of a work in progress. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you. And so the thing is, when we think about the First Great Awakening, all right, so let's see. All right. My screen should be sharing now. All right. And let me make, okay. So my screen should be sharing. Does everybody see that? Okay. Just verify with me that it's sharing all right. Just so I've got that. Just let me know in the chat. Okay, can I blow it up a little? Of course. Okay. So as far as this goes, if we think about the First Great Awakening, this is available on my website. You can Google First Great Awakening, Need to Know, and it will come up there. And I've also got a video on YouTube where I go through this. So I'm going to be doing just a very, very quick synopsis of this. Okay, so an APUSH student would be expected to know that it's a religious revival in the late colonial period. Now, when we think about the keys, one thing that you're going to see in these questions, a student needs to understand that this is going on in the entire English-speaking world. This is going on in all of the colonies and also in the mother country. Okay, now Jonathan Edwards and George Whitfield, which I think technically it's Whitfield. I like to say Whitefield because it's a written test and kids are more likely to get that. So I'll probably use that interchangeably. And so, as far as that goes, if they know who these two guys are, they know when it happened, they know what it was, and they know that the entire English speaking world was involved. Emotional preaching, itinerant preachers, that it created divisions between the old lights and the new lights. The consequences that you see a rise in non-traditional denominations and a decline in established denominations, such as the Anglican Church. That's always something I point out, that there aren't many people in the United States who are Episcopalian, which, this at the same time, though, before the First Great Awakening, most people would have been part of the Church of England. Now, another thing that I like to point out sometimes, noting that there's a concurrent movement, the Enlightenment is going on, which is focusing on rationality, and students understanding that these are two completely different ways of thinking. Now, I've also got a blank version of this in the same document if you ever want to use this for teaching purposes, and this is freely available on my website. And so, as far as that goes, when we go to the multiple choice set, now I'm using, because this is it's an online presentation, I'm using only materials that the College Board has made available to the general public. Okay, so I'm not going into exams that, like I said, if I'm doing something live, I may go to an exam that's been released to teachers or something like that, but I just want to play everything on the up and up. So this is something that the College Board has released publicly. Now, Benjamin Franklin, the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. Now, the thing is, this here doesn't necessarily give us everything we need to know there. Now, of course, a student's going to make a 5 would know, okay, Whitefield. I mean, there we go. Whitfield, Whitefield, potato, potato. Now, in 1739, there arrived among us from Ireland the Reverend Mr. George Whitfield, who had made himself remarkable there as an itinerant preacher. Now, I already see. All right, this is about the First Great Awakening. Now, again, we've got Benjamin Franklin, so we put him in the late colonial period, and we see that there is George Whitfield. So this is about the First Great Awakening. So a student now just needs to. Now, you could get into that really complex, like Benjamin Franklin's a man of the Enlightenment and all that, but you probably don't need all that stuff. This is actually pretty basic, and the specific stuff is really much more tested in the free response sections. All right. So as far as what we see here on question 1, okay, so Whitfield's impact suggests that the religious culture among British North American colonists in the 1700s was most directly shaped by. Now, the thing is, I don't really need to look at the stimulus in order to know this. Now, Roman Catholic influences. Now, this is an example of what I was talking about by out of period, that, a student should understand that when we think about the waves of migration in U.S. history, Roman Catholic influences, although 1 in 4 Americans today is a Roman Catholic, it's the single largest religious group in the country. This is too early for Roman Catholic influences. This is a time when, the British North America was over 90% Protestant. So not a lot of Catholics before the Irish came in the antebellum period. And that's actually the next one on this publicly available exam. Interest in commerce and business. Now, what we see here, religious culture, commerce, and business, that sounds to me to be irrelevant. Okay, is this shaping religious culture? Now, remember the word directly. Okay, what we see here is most directly. I think this is something that's very important to point out to your students, that this is directly. So if a student knows who he is, they already, it's like there's nothing the stimulus is going to help them answer this question. Now, another thing that they do, because we want to make, the College Board wants to make this seem hard. Okay, this is so rigorous. So instead of just coming out and saying it's across the English speaking world, they say, okay, transatlantic exchanges, because this sounds, this sounds really up there. And this is the right answer, because the transatlantic exchange, what you're seeing is, okay, that's the English speaking world, because that includes Britain. And so the First Great Awakening was a transatlantic exchange. Now, Reliance on agriculture, that's another one that's just irrelevant. Now, unless you're talking about Thomas Jefferson, agriculture is not a religion. And so, as far as that goes, we've got one that's out of period, two that are irrelevant, and this one, while it might confuse students, it's the one that's left over after you eliminate the out of period and two that are, that are irrelevant. But I think students also need to realize that when they see this language that looks like, over their heads a little bit, that this is something that, that could be the right answer. Now, two, Whitfield's open air preaching contributed most directly, now once again, most directly to which of the following trends? Now, the growth of the ideology of Republican motherhood, which is just a little bit out of period. This is something that is after the American Revolution. Now, greater independence and diversity of thought, we'll keep that one, although this is something, that's another thing I want to go into, because at first I overthought and I picked this one because I associated greater independence and diversity of thought with the Enlightenment. And that was my bad, but I think it's very important to, just be upfront with students. This one got me. Movement of settlers to the back country. Okay, now the thing is, it is not contributing to, Whitfield's open air preaching is not contributing to a migration. Now, here's the thing that I was like, well, social reform, well, there were social divisions, and, isn't religion technically a social reform? And I overthought myself into picking this one, okay? But when it comes down to it, if we think about what is the question actually asking, what do the test makers want to make sure that we know? The thing is, one thing the test makers want to make sure that we know is that the Second Great Awakening led to the pursuit of massive social reforms. And so what we see here, greater independence and diversity of thought, this is something, of course, that you have, greater diversity of thought when it comes to religion, that the rise of these non-traditional denominations. And so one thing that I want to point out here is students need to be aware that in most cases, this one was obviously wrong. This one was obviously wrong. The student shouldn't really overthink between the two that are left. Okay. So, when the student's reminded, you got to get half of these right. Don't just sit there and puzzle over this. And, if you get it wrong, you're going to get some wrong. If a general were to only go to battle when they're not going to leave soldiers on the field, they're never going to go to battle. And so eliminate the ones that can be eliminated, make a decision, move on to the next one. Okay. And so in this case, greater independence and diversity of thought, which as long as the student's not overthinking, but AP students like to overthink. And that's something that has to be addressed with students that are overthinkers. I'm certainly, an overthinker myself sometimes. Now, 3, the preaching described in the excerpt is an example of which of the following developments of the 1700s. Now, this is one thing that I want to note here. This is a trick that they often play, that they try to direct the student to the passage when they may not need the passage. Okay, so in this case, the preaching of George Whitfield or the preaching of the First Great Awakening, it's not like the passage is going to say anything shocking. It's kind of like AP Government on the AP Government exam. In the past, you have tables that students have to analyze to get certain things right. But I always told my students that the table is never going to have anything that's not correct. And so the more that a student understands about like political demographics and stuff like that, they're going to know what's in that chart already. And it's seldom new information. So the thing is, the preaching of the First Great Awakening. Now, you could go and read the excerpt, which in most cases, the student will give it a cursory read. But if you know about the First Great Awakening, it's an example of what? The emergence of an idea of Republican self-government. I would question the relevance here, although there are some connections that scholars have made there, but it seems to me to be a bit irrelevant. Now, the beginning of calls for the abolition of slavery. Now, that is, first of all, the student should know that's 19th century, antebellum period, and also that that's a consequence of the Second Great Awakening, not the First Great Awakening. So you can see that there have been two questions where the distractors have focused on this this difference between the First and the Second Great Awakening. The increased influence of the Enlightenment. Now, again, I think that it's important, students would need to understand that the Enlightenment is a different movement altogether. Now, D, the expansion of Protestant evangelism. Now, the thing is, we go back to question 1, where it said something about, about Catholic influences. And so, the understanding of this as a Protestant movement. Now, another thing here is when we ask, what is the question really asking? The College Board wants this to look so rigorous. And what was this question really asking? Do you know what evangelism is? Okay. Can you associate the First Great Awakening with Protestant evangelism? And, I introduced the idea of evangelism going all the way back to the French and the Spanish, evangelizing the Indians that they encountered. So the expansion of Protestant evangelism, and it really wasn't that hard. It was just made to look hard. And so what we've got here is irrelevant, out of period, wrong, and then the correct answer. Now, another thing before I, look at some questions here. Now, 4 through 6 refer to the graph below. Migration to the United States. Now,
Hey guys, sorry. Tom just cut out for a second. Hopefully he'll come back. I think he's just trying to fix it.
All right, excellent. What was the last thing I said, Amanda?
You were just looking at the word evangelism.
Okay. So we looked at, basically what that came down to was, do you know what evangelism is? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The immigration chart.
Okay, so I've shown the migration chart. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so a quick introduction to this. Okay. So the thing is that a student may see a chart and think, oh, I've got to interpret this chart. I've got to, this peaked in 1854 and there were about 420,000 migrants. 420, the kid thinks. And then they're like, and then they see, okay, and then it went down here and then that. They don't need to get into all that. All that we see here, migration to the United States, 1820 to 1860. Who were the migrants? And if the student can associate the Irish with this, there's no need for any, it's a quick look and they've got it. Now, if the student can't associate the wave of Irish immigration with this, they're not going to get anything right. And so, even though it looks like, oh, look, colleges and universities, students have to analyze these data charts and da-da-da-da-da. This is so amazing. This is so rigorous. No, it's really not. It just looks that way. Okay, and so which of the following was a significant cause of the trend from 1843 to 1854, shown in the graph? And so the thing is, this is really irrelevant. Shown in the graph is irrelevant because a student should know that 1843 to 1854, Irish immigration. Okay, now, A, active encouragement of migration by the United States government. Next, right? B, economic and political difficulties in Germany and Ireland. Now, what we see there, okay, we see Germany and Ireland, those two waves of immigration. Now, C, incentives offered by United States companies looking to hire skilled higher skilled migrants. Now, that's out of period. That's, of course, something that we have in contemporary America, but certainly not then. Also, we know that the Irish immigrants tended to be unskilled laborers, and the Germans tended to be farmers. And so, D, adoption of free trade policies by European governments, this is irrelevant to immigration. Okay, so when it comes down to it, the question's really just asking, who were the immigrants during this time? If they know that they were coming from Germany and Ireland, then there we go. Which of the following was a direct effect in the trend in immigration after 1845? Now, again, the shown on the graph is a useless reference to a window dressing, okay? So what was the direct effect? Now, an increase in sectional tensions. Now, the thing is, this is one of those things that is irrelevant, okay? Because there was an increase in sectional tensions after 1845 as a result of the annexation of Texas, but it's irrelevant. Now, B, a major economic downturn. Well, you know what? We didn't really talk about the economy during this time. It doesn't sound familiar. Let's go to the next one. An upsurge in nativist sentiment. Now, just like the last one in the Great Awakening set was asking, do you know what evangelism is? What this question's really asking is, do you know what nativism is? And do you know that that was in, direct response to the Irish? Now, another thing that I would tell kids is always make sure you're answering these questions in order, because you see how 5 builds off of 4 a little bit. There's never a time where it's not to a kid's advantage not to tackle the questions one by one, because really number 4, you see that the Irish, and then number 5, okay, the Irish provoked this upsurge in nativism. Now, again, we need to note here that, it doesn't go into the Know Nothing Party and stuff like that. It's very basic. Now, the collapse of the second party system, this is just like A, it is irrelevant. Yes, the second party system did collapse during this time, but this wasn't really the reason for that. And so, these were Irish and German immigrants. They provoked a nativist response. None of this is rocket science, that we're seeing here. The main trend shown in the graph is most directly associated. Now, again, most directly associated, okay? And then again, shown in the graph, the main trend of antebellum immigration is associated with which of the following processes occurring in the United States at the time. Okay, so which one is most, is most directly associated? Now, the convergence of European and American cultures. Okay, well, we see, we see something to do, to do with that. That's of course happening now. The emergence of an industrialized economy. This is out of period. Okay, so this is out of period. C, the displacement of American Indians in the Southeast. This is something that's going on in the antebellum period, but it's not relevant. And then D, the resurgence of evangelical Protestantism. Okay, and so as far as that goes, we can see here. Well, there's this this convergence of European and American cultures for number 6. Because the thing is, we don't necessarily associate. So this would be the Second Great Awakening on D, and we don't associate Irish immigration with that. Okay, so what we're looking at, and sometimes these things look almost like too easy. This makes me want to check and just sometimes and that's important for the kids, like just thinking like let me just make sure that was, because it just seemed, and students don't need to second guess themselves generally on these things. Okay, so when we look at 6 here, we see that now wait, 6 is actually showing let me look at that again. Okay, so sorry about that. Mea culpa. Let's see. So 6, it's saying that is okay. With B, the emergence of an industrialized economy. Okay. Now the thing is, I really, seeing that they're saying that's B, I'm not seeing that. But then again, emergence is something that is, that's something that we can define emergence as different things. Okay. So you could say, okay, maybe there's an emergence. And that's another thing that I think is important. And I'm glad that this happened, because it happens to the best of us. Anytime we go through this, we're going to get some wrong, because there is some subjectivity here. And so there are certain things here that we can certainly see that like C and D are wrong. And if you can get it down to two of them, and sometimes you're going to get them wrong, and sometimes you're going to dispute, what the College Board says the right answer is, because there's always going to be subjectivity. But again, the kids only have to get half of these right to pass the exam. Now, before I move on to some Euro questions, let's see if there are any things here that we want to get into. Okay, so let me go ahead and let's see. Let me go ahead and just put those slides there, so you don't see just my big head. Oh, whoops, that's not this one. Okay, DBQ MC slides. There we go. There we go. All right, so let's see if there are any things here. Yeah, certainly. I think that, getting students to, to work on, because I think one of the biggest things here is, when I think about, okay, now I wouldn't say that, it's like, I mean, sure, emergence of industrialized economy, there you go. But what is it that the College Board wants people to know in the key concepts? Now, me, yes, I always, and really, I wouldn't say that I curve the test. Crystal, I scale my test. Okay, that really what I do is I look exactly like I look at what I'll do is I put the number correct, and I'll actually physically make tally marks. Okay, so then if I've got a class of 20, then I'll look at the second score. If I've got a class of 30, I'll look at the third score. I won't look at the first one, but I'll look for something. Yes, and that's the thing, Elizabeth. It's like an industrial economy was certainly emerging. It's just one of those things that may not just occur to you right off the bat. So yeah, I mean, even the teacher is going to get some things wrong once in a while. So as far as that goes, I will typically scale my test anywhere, typically between like 180, or if a student did like really bad, I'll go from 170. I find with AP parents, it's one of those things to where, they get just as upset about a C as they would about a D or an F. And if a C is not getting the point across that the student has a problem, then that point's not going to come across. And it's just, for me, it's better not to have first of all, that, if you don't scale, you're really going to discourage students. That's one thing I realized my first year, is that some students are really discouraged. The other thing is, I've got a lot to do as far as I don't need to be in parent conferences all the time. I don't need to be spending a lot of time answering emails from parents and stuff like that. Yes, I do have a test correction form that I use sometimes. I think that that's a good thing for students. I'm a fan of doing the test corrections, and I've got a format that I've got on my website. If let's see if I put here Tom Ritchie test corrections, let's see if that'll. Yes, actually, if you go into that, if you just Google Tom Ritchie test corrections, you can see a test correction form, which I borrowed from Rachel Snyder at Culver City in LA. It's not something I came up with on my own. Like I said, when I scale, I look at the gap between the highest and the lowest score. And a lot of times I scale it to only either 80, 75, or 70. Like that's usually the lowest score, because it gets the point across to the student, you didn't do that well. I don't see how anybody gains anything by making, assigning D's and F's to students who would be making like A's and B's if they'd taken honors. I try to like in my state, honors is weighted 0.5 above a regular class, 0.5 of a grade point. And then AP is a full grade point above regular. And so I try to make my course to where it's neutral, to where a student doesn't feel like they're getting a GPA bump, but a student also doesn't get penalized for taking AP. I think that that's important, that a student doesn't feel like, man, I really could have, I could have gotten 15 points higher if I'd taken honors or something like that. As far as for me, like, it really depends. For this is really more, I think I have more to offer in in strategies and going over this strategy than I do in how exactly I do things on this. Sometimes I tell people I feel like I'm better at supporting teachers than actually teaching my own class. Sometimes, but yeah, I think that there are two things that can go wrong. First of all, I think a student could think, hey, I'm going to take AP US history because it's a GPA boost. So you've got to be tough enough on your grading that kids aren't taking your class because they want to boost their GPA. But on the other hand, yeah, you don't want to be like, this class is killing my GPA, because that's always the teacher that, the parent's going to be in contact with and all of that stuff. Now, and I'll tell you, I'm not above going into like Power School or whatever, whatever y'all use, and looking at a kid's grades in other classes. It's like, I think that's a healthy thing to do, is going in and like, how's this kid doing in my AP US history class versus in like this other teacher's AP bio class. And I think that that's always, you really have to think about the culture of your school, and that you're not an outlier when it comes to grading. Because there are some schools that have school cultures where, you're expected to be very rigorous in grading. So, that's to me the biggest thing is, just culturally, where is your school, and trying to fit into that culture, and making it to where students aren't like constantly like worrying about a grade. Yeah, I think that look at other classes, see what grades they're making in there, and if you're too far above or below that, you might need to adjust something. But if you are able to see how which most of these platforms allow you to see a kid's progress in other classes. Zip grade is one of those things where you can take a picture with your phone. You can take a picture of it. It's going to grade it automatically. And I don't know if zip grade also has maybe some scaling and curving that they can build into that. I tend to do mine manually. I don't put a lot of questions on an individual test. And my test, like I said, first semester, I tend to emphasize the old style questions because I think they're more difficult and they require a student actually to do, I think, a lot more thinking. This one, it's more like just figuring out what the rules are and going into that. All right. So as far as that, yeah, and that's the thing, Amanda, you and I disagree on that, and that's fine. But I don't think the old questions are trivial. I mean, I think that there are a lot of those old questions that required students to think in a higher order than these new questions do. I mean, I think that there wasn't a problem, that there was just, people were saying that, and some of the questions certainly, but, I thought about like, during the old exam, I'd say this is a level 1 question. This is just a straight up, like, what is this? But most of the questions weren't like that on the old exam. And so as far as that stuff, let's see. All right. Okay, so going on, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to show you a couple of examples from European history. Yeah, and that's one thing, Brenda. I would rather use old questions than use like questions that are just that I found randomly. And then Albert IO, I tend to use Albert IO for practice. Like I seldom use Albert IO as a graded activity. And if I do that, it's only if they took it in my class. I assigned something, they took it in the class with me watching them. Because when they do Albert IO, I want to make sure that they're actually doing it, doing it correctly. But yes, okay. So as far as that goes, yeah. But I think the old questions have a lot of value. But you can see that every teacher's got a different philosophy on that. All right. So as far as that goes, let me go ahead and show you some things here. Now, the Northern Renaissance. Okay. So in AP European history, one of the things and the key concepts is that the student needs to understand the Northern Renaissance. Now, what I would say about this, the main things here, and I've got a video that, of course, we'll send you the slides with all the links working and all of that kind of stuff. So as far as that goes, the Italian Renaissance is more secular and individualistic, and the Northern Renaissance is more socially oriented and Christian. Like, I think that the concept outline may refer to it as Christian humanism, for example. Okay, so as far as that goes. That's really the big understanding there that we need to bring from that. But I've got a video about that. And then the multiple choice set. So let me go ahead and share my screen again, and we'll go ahead and look at this. All right. So AP Euro. Okay, so we've got this here on the AP Euro practice exam. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger here. All right, and so let's just take a look at a couple of sets for AP Euro. Okay, so we see here Conrad Keltis oration delivered at the University of Ingolstadt, 1492. O men of the German lands. Okay, yada yada yada. Now, the thing is, this is one of those where we probably have to look at this, but just to make a point, let's look at question 1. The passage above most clearly shows the influence of which of the following trends in 15th century Europe. Now, in order for that passage to show this, it has to be one of the trends. So the development of natural philosophy based on inductive and deductive reasoning. No, okay, because that's the scientific revolution, the 15th century. Now, also, I encourage students, sometimes they won't listen, but if they do listen, it's great, that write 1400s next to 15th century. It's okay for the student to do that, and it adds some clarity there. But this is too early because Galileo, that's in the 16th century that even begins. Now, B, the revival of classical learning and the development of Northern humanism, that sounds right for 1492. The continued reliance on traditional supernatural explanations of the world. Now, maybe, but then again, that's kind of subsiding a little bit. D, the development of Baroque dramatic forms to enhance the stature of elites. So that is out of period. So what we see here is that A and D are both out of period. And so we know that what we're looking for here, is this going to be about classical learning and the development of Northern humanism, which it is in Germany, so we can think about that. But let's go in and make sure. But before we're even looking at this, we were already able to eliminate 2 of them without even looking at the passage. And sure enough, we see here the German lands, yada, yada, yada. And then to such an extent are we corrupted by Italian sensuality and by fierce cruelty in extracting filthy profit, that it would have been far more holy and reverent for us to practice that rude and rustic life of old, living within the bounds of self-control. So you can see here that this is someone speaking to Germans, and these Germans, they terrified the Romans. Okay, so he's using this humanistic kind of thing, but he's responding to what he sees as the overly sensual and kind of secular aspect, the materialistic aspect of the Italian Renaissance. And so when you look here, this is demonstrating the revival of classical learning and the development of Northern humanism. And so we see here that B is what the passage most clearly shows, but obviously it couldn't have been A or D because those are out of period. His discussion of Italian influence in the German lands is most similar to which of the following? Now, Machiavelli's criticism of Italian political systems. Now the thing is, this is what I call a sucker answer, because it's using the same thing, but Machiavelli, that's Italian Renaissance. Galileo, that is a different thing altogether. Erasmus' arguments in favor of religious toleration and criticizing traditional superstitions, or Martin Luther's criticisms of the Catholic Church in the 95 Theses. Now, this is one of those where it's obviously not going to be A or B, okay? And then we see here that Erasmus, this is the only, okay, it's most similar to which of the following, that on one side you've got Erasmus, who is Northern Renaissance, and on the other side you've got Martin Luther, and he's criticizing the Catholic Church in the 95 Theses, okay? And so you've got those 2. Let me just verify this. Like I said, I usually use another Euro exam that I've used a lot, but I just want to do everything on the up and up and not use anything that hasn't been released to the public. And so with this one, they're saying, let's see, so that's 43. Let's do. Okay, this is not wanting to be very cooperative with me at the moment. Sorry about that. Oh, come on. Okay. And so we see here that 2 is D, okay? Because the 95 Theses and this are both critical of something in Italy, okay? So Erasmus is kind of thrown in there, and you might think, okay, that's the Northern Renaissance, but at the same time, it's not doing the same thing in spirit. And so the thing is there, at the same time, once again, 2 answers were very, very easy to eliminate, and the other one the other one could be a little bit more confusing. But this one is one of those that it's really about taking the passage there and doing that. But 2 of them were obviously, not the case there. Now, so then going on to the third one, okay? Now, this one is an example of one that doesn't even make a pretension to refer to the stimulus, okay? The political condition of Germany. Now, this is going on into German unification. Now, note here that it's using key dates here. Now, there's nothing here that is like making the student, hey, was German unification in 1871 or 1876? Okay, there's nothing like that. They're using all 3 of these years that are presented as distractors are years that a student should know. Beginning of the French Revolution, fall of Napoleon, end of World War II. And so all that's really required is for the student to place German unification in the late 19th century in order to get this answer. So that's another thing for students to understand, that they're not going to be using dates that are, it's not the question is not, okay? And that's the other thing. What is the question really asking? Okay, so it's not asking, do you know the year that German unification was completed? It's asking, do you know that German unification was not completed in 1789 and 1815, which were too early, and 1945, which is too late? So we have 3 answers that are very clearly out of period in this case. And then, which of the following groups in the 19th century would have agreed with the sentiments in the passage? Okay, and we see a certain amount of nationalism there, and of course romanticism, when you're looking at, he's saying like, hey, we used to make the Romans tremble here. There's really nothing about socialism, anarchism, capitalism. Do they know what nationalism is? And specifically the romanticism, about like romanticizing about these primitive German cultures that people are seeing as, superior to, to the cultures of that day. All right, and for this, I want to, let's see, I want to go to one that's got some things there that I think are important going into this. This is one on the Jesuits and the age of exploration. Now, you can see there's kind of some hybridization in some of these questions on the Euro exam, where they're actually calling on students to understand multiple periods and movements at once. Now, this is the most important thing. 1549, Francis Xavier, Spanish Jesuit priest in India. Now he's writing to Ignatius Loyola. Now, we're expecting this to come from a Jesuit. We're expecting this to come from that particular type of place. Now, once again, we can see here that number 40 makes absolutely no pretension to look at the stimulus here. The Portuguese presence in India most directly resulted from which of the following? And so a desire to obtain greater access to precious metals and luxury goods sounds good. The desire to create a supply of labor for expanding manufacturing in Europe. Now manufacturing is out of period. The desire to create new plantations for the production of cash crops, out of place. Now, one thing I've noticed, that we see questions requiring students to differentiate between what's going on in India and China during the age of exploration and what's going on in the Americas. Do they know the difference between the East Indies and the West Indies? And so this is something that's out of place, okay, because this is something that's really more to the Americas. Now, the desire to establish new markets for European manufactured goods, that is the new imperialism, which we saw an LEQ about the new imperialism. And comparing it to the age of, to colonization during the age of exploration. And so here is something, again, that is out of period, and it's specifically this objective of comparing the age of exploration with the period of the new imperialism and the scramble for Africa. So they're wanting to, have this access to precious metals and luxury goods. Now, 41. Now, this is an example of what I was talking about earlier, and we see here Xavier's views in the second paragraph support which of the following conclusions about the period 1450 to 1648. Now, before we even look here, now what's happening here is like in the second paragraph. Oh, I need to look at that. Now, before I go and look at the second paragraph, let me see if I can eliminate anything. So Christianization efforts were more successful in Asia than the Americas. Now that is, intuitively, if the student has content knowledge, obviously not true, okay? Because the Americas were thoroughly Christianized, Asia was not. Christianization was used to justify the African slave trade. I'm not really seeing a direct connection with there, but let's look at that. Now again, the African slave trade, that's associated with the other, that is the West Indies, not the East Indies. And so Christianization was generally in conflict with mercantilist policies. I don't really see a direct relationship there. D, Christianization both depended on and legitimized European colonial expansion. That looks interesting. Let's go ahead and take a look back at the second paragraph. Okay, so we're going to go take a look at his second paragraph. I see clearly, my only father, by my experience here, that no road is opening for the perpetuation of the Jesuit order among the natives. Christianity will last among them only as long as we who are here and those whom you will send from Europe will last and live. So basically, if we want to have any role, if there's any hope for Christianizing these natives, we need to maintain a presence here. Now, I think this is easier once a student has eliminated some of these answers rather than going and looking at the passage and then trying to figure it out, okay? Because if you can eliminate the two obvious distractors, then you're thinking, okay, what am I looking for now? And I think that's an important thing to bring in there, using the stimulus to stimulate and support rather than using it as the end-all be-all. And then if we look here, there's another one here that I would note here, Xavier's views of indigenous populations as expressed in the passage. Now, we may need to look or not, but were most similar to views commonly held by late 19th century Europeans in which of the following ways. Now, views commonly held by late 19th century Europeans. Now, there is a strategy to this one, okay? Because in order for an answer to be correct, it must also reflect a view of late 19th century Europeans, okay? And so when we think about this, okay, both views reflected a fear of native influences on Christianity. Not so sure about that, especially for the late 19th century, that people are scared that, like, when you think about that, put the 19th century hat on and, like, are people really afraid that the natives are going to influence Christianity? Unlikely. Both views reflected a sense of admiration for foreign cultures. C, both views reflected a sense of cultural superiority. Now, this is one that, like, jumps out at me right there at the bat. I'm thinking, okay, that's good. Now, D, both views reflected a sense of moral ambiguity concerning colonization. Now, the thing is, before I even look back, just to make sure, there's one thing that's never going to describe a Jesuit, and that's moral ambiguity, okay? You think about this guy's a Jesuit missionary, that's probably unlikely. What I'm expecting to see here is the sense of cultural superiority. So, then if we want to look back, and a lot of times the student will have read this, but, you might read it, might be better to read some of the stuff afterwards. But let me go and kind of check my work here. So first sentence, first, the natives of India, so far as I've seen, speaking generally, are barbarians, okay? And so the thing is here that, you see right there off the bat, what his view is. He's obviously not writing this with the intention to admire them. And so when I think about that, okay, I mean, there is that sense of cultural superiority, which is what I was expecting to see. And in a lot of cases, if a kid knows the material, what they're expecting to see is going to be there. But then if they just go through and they read this and they think that the questions are going to be just about comprehending, it's going to take them longer. It's going to be, another mindset there. So then 43, we see that there is no direct connection with the passage. He was identified as a Jesuit. So even if a kid didn't know who Francis Xavier was, and when I assign the readings on the Counter-Reformation, the Jesuits, I put, what I'm doing this year is I'm going to put like a column for students trying to make a 3 and a column for students trying to get a 4 or 5, kind of differentiating instruction depending on a student's goals. And I don't think to get a 3, a kid doesn't need to know who Francis Xavier was. Now, they do need to know who the Jesuits were. And so Xavier is identified as a Jesuit here. It wasn't strictly necessary that a kid know who he is, but they need to know the Jesuits was a member of, which he was a member, was important in the history of 16th century Europe, primarily because now remember words like primarily or directly. There could be more than one direct correct answer. We're looking for something that's obvious. Now, challenged Protestant teachings and helped revive the church during the Catholic Reformation. That sounds good to me. Studied Greek and Roman text, but challenged secular values in Renaissance humanism. Now, that's just not as primary of a mission as I see for A. C, ensured Catholic institutions remained outside monarchical control. Now, I could see a Jesuit doing that, but I don't think that that is the primary mission of the Jesuits. Now, revived universities in Eastern Europe. Now, what I would say here, note Eastern Europe. That's not, of course, the Jesuits do go into Poland and have a fair amount of success there, and Bohemia and someplace like that. But, when we think about primarily, when we're looking for words like that. So this is really about strategy. What was the primary mission of the Jesuits' Protestant teachings? Now, so the biggest things here, just noting that the stimulus is a lot of times, smoke and mirrors. The other thing that 2 answers can typically be eliminated. The kid can really, if the kid is using the stimulus more as a support for their content knowledge, I think that that's going to work a lot better than if the student is going into this like a reading comprehension test. And so with that, let me go ahead and I've got some things here, and Amanda's going to send out the link that's going to go into more of that. And so, with that, very honored and happy to be here and all of that. And I'll, let's see what questions come in before we wrap up.
Tom, that was great. I feel like I totally understand.
Okay, well, thank you. And that's the thing. I was trying to figure, what is this? I mean, and I think that, it really is about students being woke to what is behind this. And really, I think explaining the College Board's goals are very important. That the College Board has to present this as rigorous to colleges and universities, but it has to be doable for kids. And that's really what we've got there. Thank you so much, Barbara. And I've got some more APUSH stuff, of course, coming out later on. I actually taught APUSH for, initially, and then started teaching Euro. And the videos for Euro just were more popular because there were less people doing them. But I haven't forgotten about APUSH, and I'm glad that's helping. And thank you. Thank you all very much. Okay. And it looks like, I don't see. Yes, of course, Christine. Yeah, there will be AP Euro videos, especially I'm hoping to delve into the 20th century. And while I have not got anything, we haven't gotten anything set in stone. It's very likely that I'll be doing some continuing work with Fiveable. So just keep that in mind. All of you who are here, y'all have a year subscription to Fiveable. And what my role is going to be with Fiveable hasn't been absolutely determined, but I'm fairly sure, we'll try to read Amanda's face there. I'm fairly sure there will be some kind of role moving forward. So do, stay engaged with this website as it launches. I think it's going to be really helpful to kids.
Yeah, and quick note, our new website will be up within the next few weeks. And so for all of you, we'll make sure that your students have access to everything. We'll be working with you guys next week over the next few weeks to make sure that happens. And so if you haven't already, just make sure you quickly fill out this little form so that we're going to kind of use that to help you get your kids signed up. So if you are definitely interested in making sure your students get signed up for Fiveable, just fill that form out so we know how many kids you have and what other AP classes they might be taking. And then last, we've got 2 other sessions today. So in about 50 minutes, we've got the long essay question with Josh Bailey. And I've looked through his slides and I'm super stoked to hear everything he has to say about how to teach the LEQs. And then later today is a really special session. It's with Ross Dunn, who is one of the founding members of the World History Association and kind of created world history as we know it. And Laura Mitchell, who's another amazing historian. And the 2 of them are going to be talking about kind of how to teach big picture themes and not feel so stuck in the, teaching the specific dates and times and facts, but more teaching big picture in your classroom. So I'm really excited for both of those sessions. And yeah, everything from yesterday is posted on the website. If you just click the thumbnails on the main page, you can see everything there. And all the sessions from today will be up as well.
All right. Well, thanks again, Amanda, for having me, and looking forward to being in touch with all these great teachers during the year.
For sure. And really quick, before you guys leave, I'm just going to launch a poll just to see how helpful this was. Just kind of useful for us to get a little bit of data. So before you leave, and after that, we will see you in just under an hour for the LEQ. And yeah, this has been fun.
All right. Thanks, you.
Tom. All right, we got 40 answers. Cool. Looks like everyone's stoked about multiple choice now. Cool. All right, y'all. See you later.